everybody, and welcome to our next session, which I'm thrilled to say is a conversation with a dear friend of the Foreign Policy Initiative and one of the people I admire most in the world, Senator John McCain. Senator McCain, along with Senator Lieberman, is just back from a trip to Afghanistan, Iraq. I think they also stopped in Pakistan. So we'll be discussing that and some other issues. I know I don't really have to introduce Senator McCain to you. I do think that, this is a personal opinion, that in the new configuration of Congress, Senator McCain is likely, I wouldn't say likely, I would say certain, to be the most important voice in Congress of either party on American foreign and defense policy. And that I'm hopeful that the administration and Senator McCain and other colleagues in the Senate and the House are going to be able to work together to advance American interests at a very difficult time. And I can't think of anybody better to play that role than Senator McCain.
Thank you, Bob.
So, Senator, well, you are just back from Afghanistan and Iraq, and there's a lot of discussion now about how meaningful the July 2011 deadline is. The administration seems to be talking about a different date now, a 2014 date. And I was just wondering if you could give us your impressions, having been on the ground, having talked to President Karzai, and we'll get to some comments that he's made in the last day or two about that. What's your impression about what the right strategy should be, how General Petraeus is doing at this point, and where you think the administration's thinking is on this issue right now?
Well, thank you, Bob. And could I just mention that I've been going to Afghanistan for many, many years and frequently because obviously the conflict there and the service and sacrifice of brave young Americans, but also the importance of Afghanistan and the entire global situation as far as our efforts to combat radical Islamic extremism. First time I was there, I met President Karzai at Bagram Air Force Base. He had just come to the country, escorted by our station chief of there at the time. It was a fascinating evening, and I've watched him very carefully over the years, and each time visit, I've had dinner with him, as we just did a few nights ago. There's three really main problems, situation in Iraq. First of all, militarily, we are doing very well. I, without modification, allege that General David Petraeus ranks amongst the absolute finest military leaders that this nation has ever had the honor of serving it. I mean, he's a remarkable leader, and they have turned things in the right direction. In the clear and hold side of the counterinsurgency strategy, they've done very well. But they're only in the clear and hold. They're not in the build side of counterinsurgency. But they just took control of Mullah Omar's hometown down in Kandahar in Helmand province. And we visited in outposts and visited with Afghan leaders and in the field and governors and all that. But so that side of the conflict is going, frankly, better than many of us had expected, given the complexities of Afghanistan. That's the upside. The downside is that there is still significant corruption in Afghanistan at the highest level of the Karzai government. His attorney general is corrupt. There was some high-level investigation and charges that needed to be brought, and they were dropped. That's a terrible example to the rest of the country, not to mention his brother and others. So corruption is a very serious problem. The other problem is over in Pakistan. The Pakistanis continue to hedge their bets on Afghanistan by having close relations between elements of ISI, not all of ISI, and we'd be glad to get in those nuances, but in fact, elements of ISI are cooperating actively with Taliban and the Haqqani network. That is very bad. You can stalemate an enemy, but you cannot defeat an enemy if they have sanctuary. We have found that out throughout history. And finally, both Karzai's behavior, Pakistani behavior, India's behavior, Iranian involvement, all of the nations in the region are very uncertain, that's my best comment, about the United States' staying power and to whether we are going to be there or not. Famous story that maybe most of you have heard was a high-ranking Taliban was captured and was being interrogated by an American interrogator, and he said, "You've got the watches, we've got the time." And there is that belief down to the lowest level. I was with a province chief a few days ago, and he said, "Yeah, we think it's very likely that the Americans are leaving, and the Taliban say they're going to cut off anybody's head who cooperated with the U.S." So it's a big problem. I know that the Secretary of State and the Secretary of Defense and others have said the right things about conditions-based, but the President of the United States, just a few days ago, reiterated the 2011 date. People will listen to our Secretary of State, they'll listen to our Secretary of Defense, but it's what the President says. And according to Bob Woodward's book, he made that decision based on, quote, he didn't want to lose the left base of his party. Presidents should not make decisions where we're sending young men and women into harm's way based on political consideration. That's not the tradition of Harry Truman or Franklin Delano Roosevelt or other great leaders in America's history. So the good news in Afghanistan is that thanks to the finest military we have ever produced throughout our history, best trained, best equipped, most professional, the blend of military activity and technology is truly amazing. We have basically decimated the mid-level of the Taliban. Their leaders are over in Afghanistan, and it has had a significant impact on Taliban morale and effectiveness. But when you get into these other situations, you get these bizarre statements such as dominated the news over the weekend. It's not good.
Well,
I could go on for a long time, but I obviously hope that encapsulates what I think is the situation.
well, it does, and I mean, it's a terrific summary, and I guess the question is, what are you going to do to try to convince the president that he needs to sort of join with the rest of his cabinet on this issue?
Well, as you know, there's going to be a quote, assessment in December and also this Lisbon meeting. I understand the president is going to Lisbon. I think the president at that time could give a very, very strong statement that we're in this thing to win, that withdrawal of middle of 2011 is notional, but 2014 is really the year that we would expect to have significant withdrawals. And again, there are areas by the middle of next year, particularly in northern Afghanistan, where we could withdraw troops. But believe me, General Petraeus would be the first to tell you, we need them in the south and in the east. So it's not as if we could bring those troops home. So the president will have an opportunity when that assessment is taking place, and most particularly in Lisbon, and I hope he will seize that opportunity.
I mean, there was a good editorial, or I thought it was a good editorial by Fred Hyatt today, saying that a lot of people are talking about 2014, and the only people who haven't been told about 2014 or moving past 2011 are the American people. Is that your view too, that the American people are not really being given a straight answer on this question right now?
I think Americans, first of all, are still dominated by domestic economic issues. And it's interesting that this last election, Afghanistan, Iraq, other issues were just totally absent, but understandably. But second of all, I think that when we have brave young Americans suffering casualties, as we predicted, at an increased level, that Americans are becoming very restive. And I don't think that the president's not saying anything about it and not giving speeches and not giving statements about it probably continues to hasten an erosion of support for what we're doing in Afghanistan. Just last week, the son of General Kelly, the head of the Marine Reserves, was killed. 3 brave young Arizonans gave their lives. It's awfully tough. It's awfully tough. And the President of the United States' job is to keep the American people informed as to why those sacrifices were necessary.
And what about within the Republican Party? Do you see any possibility of erosion of support in the Republican Party?
Yes, and I worry, Bob. I worry a lot because always, throughout the history of the Republican Party in modern times, there's been, obviously, as we know, two wings. The isolationist wing, manifested before World War II and at other times, and the internationalist side. And so I think there are going to be some tensions within our party. I don't know the incoming Senator Rand Paul. I respect him, admire his victory, but already he has already talked about withdrawals from or cuts in defense, et cetera, and a number of others are. There's no doubt that this new group to take a meat axe to spending. I'm not sure that you could say, okay, everything in defense is sacrosanct, while the rest of these cuts in education, social programs, et cetera, are taking place. So I worry a lot about the rise of protectionism and isolationism in the Republican Party.
Well, I mean, because the draft report of the Fiscal Commission has been put out, and there's a call in there for a $100 billion cut in defense, a notional cut in 2015. Do you think it's possible for us to cut $100 billion out of the defense budget?
I do. And the reason why I say that is because as you know, Secretary Gates, one of the really outstanding secretaries of defense that we've had in our history, and we've had a difference on a couple issues, but overall, he's a tremendous leader, has already stated that over 5 years, we can eliminate or reduce over a 5-year period, $100 billion in defense spending, and I guarantee you we could do that. Look at the F-35. Here's a weapon system that, in keeping with recent tradition, is double the initial cost per aircraft. That's unacceptable. It's unacceptable to have a cost-plus contract that runs 17 months over and double the cost. I don't know if you heard about one of the secret satellite systems, complete failure with $3 or $4 billion. Did you hear about the virtual fence we were going to build down on our southern border to cover the entire border? Total failure, total and complete failure. So I think there's a lot of savings in defense. And by the way, one of them is to cut out of the defense budget and the appropriations bill all of those programs that have been larded on that have nothing to do with defense. That have nothing to do with defense. It's the old Willie Sutton syndrome, you know. Rob the banks because that's where the money is. The appropriators and the special interests go to the defense authorization bill, appropriations bill. And one other thing, the earmarks are important. The earmarks, most of them are on the defense appropriations bill. And we cut out those earmarks and we can save billions right there. Somebody's going to say, oh, well, that's only 2 or 3% of the budget. Oh, is that all? Maybe 10, 20, 30, 50 billion? Is that all? Oh, yeah, so let's leave it alone? Give me a break.
Well, let me push you back, and not on the desire to restore meaningless earmarks, but if you look at American requirements globally now, you have a rising China. Even this administration is adopting at least a quasi-containment approach, but part of our position in East Asia is dependent on reassuring Japan, reassuring Korea, reassuring other nations in the region. In the Middle East, you've got Iran, which is potentially going nuclear. I could go on. While it's possible to see savings that should be made, aren't there going to be actually increasing demands as well on our budget?
I think that there will be. I hope that we can enact sufficient savings and sufficient reforms, hopefully that those costs would be absorbed in that effort. But you bring up the whole issue of China and the importance of the oceans. I think we're going to see kind of full circle a requirement for the United States of America to have significant naval presence in that part of the world, in the Indian Ocean, in the South China Sea, and there's no doubt that it won't be a NATO-type alliance, but I think there will be the development of relationships between those countries you just mentioned, including a growing partnership with India to counterbalance the growing influence and sometimes aggressive behavior of China. And I'm not predicting war. I'm not predicting conflict with China, because the best way to prevent that conflict is to develop relationships in the region, particularly India, but also Japan, Vietnam, and other countries. It's fascinating how the Vietnamese have become our best friends, which shows if you live long enough, anything can happen. But I really do want to emphasize the economic shift in power to Asia from the traditional, or certainly recent, U.S.-European sector to Asia is going to have significant effects which I don't think anybody can exactly predict.
Well, one of the tools of our ability to deal with this rise in an intelligent way is military. Another is free trade. And the president obviously was unable at this stage to get an agreement with South Korea. I guess he hopes he'll get one in the future. But free trade in general, and not just necessarily in Asia, but maybe in Latin America as well. What's your view of the way the administration has handled free trade so far, and what kind of cooperation can he expect from Republicans?
For the last 2 years, the president in the State of the Union speeches has had one line, and I'm for free trade agreements. There has been really no emphasis in the last 2 years on the part of the administration to get the ratification of those free trade agreements, and I'm not sure they could have, given the dominance and the individuals in position of power, particularly on the House side. But I'm glad to see the president coming to this, particularly South Korea, but we need all three. And we need a trans-Pacific free trade agreements. Look, if you are against free trade agreements, you then believe that the United States can't compete. I do not believe that the United States of America can't compete. I believe we can compete anywhere. And the problem is that other nations are concluding free trade agreements in our own hemisphere and in Asia and in other parts of the world, while we stand back and argue whether there's enough beef being imported or exported from Korea. This whole issue of the automobile situation, I think, could have been resolved much easier 2 years ago, before there's a perception of American weakening in the region than now. So I applaud the president's effort. I want to support him in every possible way. But I also, again, final answer to your final part of the question, yes, I worry about Republican protectionism as well. It was Republicans that passed the Smoot-Hawley Tariff Acts. It has been Republicans that have been protectionist as well as Democrats. So all I can say is that the next 6 months, I think, are going to be very crucial on this whole issue of free trade. I'd like to see a package of all three.
By all three, you mean South Korea, Colombia, and Panama.
Yeah, absolutely. And Colombia, I mean, it makes no sense. Here we are piling up tariffs that are imposed on our goods that are brought into Colombia. Meanwhile, theirs come in the United States for free. It's crazy.
Moving back to the Middle East.
And by the way, Colombia has also been a very staunch ally. We would have much greater problems on the issue of drugs than we do, which are huge, but they'd be much worse if it had not been for Uribe and his successor, General Santos.
Okay, great. You were in Iraq, and they seem to have announced a new government. I want to get your opinion of that new government, and also about the way the United States handled its role in guiding the Iraqis on this issue.
After the Iraqi elections, we basically took a hands-off position. And I'm sure that in an ideal world, that's the right thing to do. It's not an ideal world. We've already sacrificed 4,400 young Americans. We have a vested interest. And so for a number of months, the United States said, well, we'll have to work it out. And we had an ambassador who was totally inexperienced in the region. Finally, we got interested after this thing dragged out and dragged out and dragged out. And by the way, violence began to uptick. Countries that don't reflect the will of the people That's not surprising, particularly given the fact that Al-Qaeda and other elements have not been totally suppressed. So we finally got engaged, and I'd like to give the Vice President credit for getting engaged in it and taking a hands-on role. The agreement that they made in some ways was disappointing because the vote in Iraq was for change. And Maliki is the most popular guy in Iraq. His party got the largest number of votes that blocked Iraqia. But the fact is, and another thing that's very disturbing is that Talabani has been having significant communications or dealings with Iran. The Iranians tried very hard to involve themselves in the formation of this government. They was largely unsuccessful. There's an age-old history there that goes way, way, way back. But Talabani stayed as president. That's the bad news. The good news is that he's going to lose his veto power under change in government. Maliki still, I think, is not playing as great a role as he should. Alawi is not playing as great a role as I think that he should, given the outcome of the elections. And there's all kinds of wheeling and dealing going on. So it's a messy business. I wish them luck. I want them to succeed. I want the Maliki to understand that inclusiveness is vital if they're going to succeed. If they don't have an inclusive government that reflects the will of the Iraqi people, then they are going to experience some difficulties. The results of that are not yet totally clear, but at least they are forming a government.
Is it fair to say that you're worried about a possible Shia dictatorship in Iraq?
I'm very worried. I'm very worried. The Sunnis are, as you know, staged a kind of a cosmetic walkout, but then they returned. I love the Kurds. They're just incredibly brave and wonderful people, but their demands, Barzani's demands, I think, are a bit of an overreach. We've still got these problems in Kirkuk, Mosul, all of that area. And by the way, it's in relative scheme of things, maybe you look at it as a small thing, but that massacre of the Christian change. I think that historians will look back at the moment when the demonstrators were on the streets of Tehran after we had watched a young woman named Neda bleed to death in the streets in Tehran, and the president and the demonstrators were chanting, "Obama, Obama, are you with us or are you with them?" And the president of the United States came out after silence for 3 or 4 days and said, "Well, I don't want to jeopardize my chances of negotiating with the Islamic Iranian government," or whatever he called it. That was a moment in history. And I believe that the Cold War is a great example. We provided Lech Walesa and the workers at Gdansk with printing presses. The modern day equivalent of that is our means of communication through Twitter, through the internet, through all of the means we have to communicate with people. We should be doing everything we can to provide information, knowledge, therefore resistance to the people of Iran. What was done to those demonstrators is unspeakable. More people in the world should know about that. And I don't believe that this regime can last forever, because it obviously is a minority government that does not reflect the will of a very cultured and sophisticated people. And so I think we need to do a lot more to help the dissidents within Iran, and I do not mean with weapons, but I mean with something much stronger than weapons, and that's information. My great disappointment is our continued efforts to get them to, quote, unclench the fist. Now we're going to have some more, quote, discussions. It seems the object, as stated by the administration, is to bring them back to the negotiating table. Meanwhile, Israel feels more and more threatened. Meanwhile, other nations in the region become more and more unsettled, and this could be a dangerous flashpoint sometime in the not too distant future.
This is right back there on this side.
Hi, it's such an honor, Senator. My name's Heather Robinson. I'm a journalist. Hello. I liked your words about support for dissidents in Iran, and I'm in touch with some Iraqi politicians. One of them is named Mital al-Alusi. I don't know if you've heard about him. He traveled to Israel to promote normalized relations between Iraq and Israel. Very brave man. Terrorists murdered his 2 sons because he took this stand. He stayed in Iraq, got elected to parliament, served 5 years, and he lost in the last election. He and several others who he describes to me as the liberal candidates. He tells me that the Islamists, the hardcore Islamist candidates in Iraq, had a lot of assistance from Iran financially. And he feels that he and other liberals, they feel isolated, they feel, I wouldn't go so far as to say abandoned, but they don't feel they can count on the U.S. And
Can
I'm
I just
wondering,
hasten you to the question
Sorry,
part of this?
yeah.
Thank you.
Are you aware of any efforts to help these Iraqi liberal politicians?
Yeah, there was Iranian money that poured into those elections, as you know. I've heard estimates of $100 million. But it doesn't seem, and there were some losing candidacies, and there were some outcomes that obviously we might have liked to have seen different. But overall, the Iranian influence was not as much as we feared, and had some impact, but certainly not overall impact. I think you and I know very well that there is a thousands-year-old rivalry between Persian and Arab, and so their influence, I think, is going to be not as serious as or as impactful as we had feared. The major challenge I think that this new government has is to prove its legitimacy to Sunni and to Kurds in particular, but also to the majority of the Iraqi people, that they are representative of the election, even with its imperfections. If that is going to be the case, then I think that Iranian influence can be further minimized. And by the way, if there's anything that came out of this WikiLeaks thing, it was information that indicates how heavily engaged the Iranians were in military activity in Iraq during the height of the conflict there. Very, very significant.
Yes, sir, right here.
TJ Han from British American Security Information Council. In a recent presidential visit to India, President Obama had a joint statement that there should be a meaningful dialogue among the countries that has nuclear weapons. What would be congressional approach on this? Is the Senate ready to embrace this new vision of a world without nuclear weapons that expands outside of the NPT?
Well, I hope that we have a world without nuclear weapons. I also hope that pigs fly. But I doubt seriously if either will happen anytime soon. I hate to use the phrase, but if I had been president, I would have gone to India and obviously talk about trade and jobs. But the criticality of our relationship with India is the strategic partnership between the world's oldest democracy and the world's largest democracy. This is the key to the future of the world, in my view. And I'm not saying just because it's a counterweight to China, although that's certainly part of it. But democracies have common interests and common values. And that's what I believe we should emphasize in this relationship with India. India is a maturing nation in many ways, not just economically, but in many other ways. And yes, they have significant flaws and problems, including a Muslim population larger than that in Pakistan. But they are a functioning democracy, and that's what I think should be emphasized. And all of the other things flow from that: trade, jobs, all the things you want to talk about. So I guess in response to your comment, I think that we need very much to have a maturing relationship with India, including the issue of trade and jobs, but primarily an example to the entire world that functioning democracies are best for the people, not only that live in these countries, but around the world.
We have time for one more question, even though I know you're all very eager to ask more. I'm going to go with Eli Lake over here. It's going to be a good one, right? Eli, okay.
Senator McCain, Eli Lake from the Washington Times. Can you expand on what you said about Jalal Talabani's contacts with Iran, and did you urge Masoud Barzani for the Kurds to give up the presidency in Iraq when you were there last week?
Yes. We're concerned about Talabani's contacts with Iran, and we felt that another Kurd would have been a better selection for president of Iraq. There's some benefit to the fact that very soon Talabani or the presidency of Iraq loses veto power over legislation. That's very important. And I think that the result would have been better if there had been someone other than Talabani as president. I still harbor some optimism and great hope that the Iraqis will work this out. They will give Alawi a very important position in this, quote, National Security Council and define what the powers are. But I also worry, as you know, a bit. One thing about the Prime Minister is he's been pretty good at consolidating power. At the same time, he has governed well, and I've watched Maliki grow in stature and ability over the years that he has been Prime Minister. So I guess my long-term answer is keep your fingers crossed, hope that we have this messy but functioning government reflect what is best for the people of Iraq. If I had to guess, I think the odds are that this will succeed, but I have significant concerns.
Well, thank you, Senator. I'm sure I speak for the audience here when I say that it's just it's a treat to listen to a man go through the entire world with the breadth and depth of knowledge that you do. And again, I only hope and trust that that your counsel will be very much in the minds of the President and others making policy in this government as we move forward. But thank you very much for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you.
Okay, we now have a bit of a break before we're going to move upstairs to the altitude room on the 11th floor. So you can mingle here a bit if you'd like, or you can start moving up to the 11th floor. There are 2 elevators reserved to take you up to the top. The other thing I'll say is those of you who have registered for the lunch have green dots on your name tags. If you do not have a green dot, please check in with registration on the 11th floor before you move into the lunchroom.